Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Flipped, 2010, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. Some movies make you laugh, some make you cry, and then there are those rare gems that capture the essence of life itself, leaving you with a nostalgic warmth that lingers long after the credits roll. Flipped is one of those films. Directed by Reiner, this coming-of-age romantic drama takes a simple story about young love and turns it into something deeply heartfelt, beautifully nostalgic, and profoundly real. Set in the 1950s and 60s, Flipped isn't just a romance. It's a story about perspective, change, and the way we grow into our feelings without realizing it. The movie follows Bryce and Julie Baker, two kids who live across the street from each other but couldn't see the world more differently. For Julie, it's love at first sight the moment she meets Bryce in second grade. For Bryce, however, it's an entirely different story. He spends years doing everything he can to avoid her, brushing off her affection and seeing her as nothing more than a weird, overly enthusiastic neighbor. But life has a way of flipping things upside down, and as the years pass, Bryce slowly starts to see Julie in a different light, just as she begins to question whether he's really the person she thought he was. This shift in perspective is what makes Flipped stand out from typical love stories. It doesn't just follow one character's journey but instead gives us both sides of the story, showing us how the same moments, the same conversations, and the same experiences can mean completely different things to two different people. From the very first scene, the film draws you in with its charming, nostalgic atmosphere. The warm cinematography, the carefully chosen period details, and the heartfelt narration by both Bryce and Julie make it feel like stepping into a memory, one filled with laughter, heartbreak, and quiet realizations that define what it means to grow up. Julie Baker is a free spirit, full of life, curiosity, and an unshakable belief in the goodness of the world. She sees beauty in places others overlook, especially in the enormous sycamore tree that she climbs to feel connected to something bigger than herself. This tree, in many ways, represents Julie's worldview, rooted, strong, full of wonder and possibility. Bryce, on the other hand, is more cautious, shaped by his father's expectations and the need to fit in. He is embarrassed by Julie's enthusiasm, by her refusal to be anything but herself. He worries about what others think and spends years trying to avoid being associated with her. But as time goes on, things start to shift. As Julie grows more independent and begins to see Bryce's flaws, Bryce starts to see the depth of Julie's character, the kindness, the strength, the courage she has to be exactly who she is, without apology. And suddenly, the girl he once dismissed as strange becomes the girl he can't stop thinking about. The beauty of Flipped is in the way it captures the slow, subtle ways people change, the moments that seem insignificant at first but, in hindsight, become the turning points of our lives. It's in the way a single glance can mean the world, or how the simple act of planting a tree can symbolize something much bigger than itself. With an incredible supporting cast, including Aidan Quinn, Penelope and Miller, and Anthony Edwards, the film isn't just about young love. It's also about family, expectations, and the struggles that come with growing up in a world that often tries to tell you who you should be. Bryce's father, in particular, plays a crucial role in the story. A man who judges others harshly, who prioritizes appearances over authenticity, and whose influence shapes Bryce in ways he doesn't fully understand until much later. Julie's family, by contrast, is filled with warmth and imperfection, a household where love is expressed through small acts of kindness, where struggles are met with resilience, and where being true to yourself is more important than fitting in. As the film builds toward its poignant and quietly powerful ending, we see how much Bryce and Julie have changed. The roles have reversed. Bryce is now the one chasing after Julie, trying to prove that he sees her for who she really is, just as she starts to wonder if he's worth the trouble after all. Flipped doesn't give us a grand, dramatic love confession or a predictable Hollywood ending. Instead, it gives us something real, something small, yet incredibly meaningful. It gives us a moment of understanding, of possibility, a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes love doesn't arrive in an instant. It grows, slowly, over time, until one day you wake up and realize everything has changed. It's a film that reminds us of the people we once were, the feelings we once had, and the lessons we carry with us long after childhood fades. And that's what makes Flipped so unforgettable. It doesn't just tell a love story. It tells a story about life itself. And trust me, once you've watched it, you'll never look at a sycamore tree the same way again. From the moment Julie Baker laid eyes on Bryce Losky, she knew it was love. Not the kind of love that grows over time, not the kind that takes years to realize. No, for Julie, it was instant. The moment Bryce moved into the house across the street in second grade, with his bright blue eyes and nervous smile, Julie felt something inside her flip, as if she had found something special. And from that day forward, she was determined to get close to him, to make him notice her, to make him feel the same way she did. But for Bryce, it was the complete opposite. From the very first time she ran up to him, grinning from ear to ear, her dark hair bouncing with excitement, Bryce wanted nothing more than to get away. She was too much, too intense, too eager for a friendship that he wasn't ready for. And so, he did what most kids his age would do. He avoided her. He rolled his eyes, turned away, and pretended not to see her whenever she got too close. But the more Bryce tried to push her away, the more determined Julie became. 4 years, she followed him, always smiling, always hopeful. She found ways to talk to him at school, offered to help with his homework, and never missed a chance to sit next to him when she could. She was convinced that one day he would see what she saw, that they were meant to be together. Bryce, however, had other plans. He spent most of elementary school coming up with ways to avoid her, embarrassed by the way she always seemed to be watching him. His best friend, Garrett, teased him endlessly about his girlfriend, which only made him resent Julie more. And as much as he tried to be polite, tried to play it cool, he couldn't stand the way she made him feel, trapped, like he had no choice in the matter. But Julie was oblivious to his discomfort, lost in her own world of hopeful fantasies. She told herself that Bryce was just shy, that he was too nervous to admit he liked her back. And for a while, that was enough. Then came the sycamore tree. One day, while walking home from school, Julie noticed a massive, towering sycamore tree at the corner of their neighborhood. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Strong, ancient, its branches stretching out like arms ready to embrace the sky. Without a second thought, she climbed it. For hours, she sat there, feeling the wind on her face, looking out over the world from a place that felt untouchable. And every day after that, she came back, climbing higher, staying longer, feeling like she belonged up there in a way she never did anywhere else. Bryce thought she was crazy. He never understood why Julie spent so much time in that tree, why she cared so much about something as simple as branches and leaves. But to her, it was more than just a tree. It was a sanctuary, a reminder that there was beauty in the world if you just knew where to look. But then, something happened that changed everything. One afternoon, when Julie arrived at her usual spot, she saw something that made her stomach drop, a group of city workers standing beneath her tree, ready to cut it down. She begged them to stop, pleaded with them to see what she saw, to understand that some things are too precious to destroy. She fought, she argued. She even refused to climb down, hoping that if she just stayed there long enough, they would change their minds. But no one listened. Not even Bryce. He had been there, standing on the sidewalk, watching it all unfold. He could have said something, could have defended her, could have told the workers that the tree meant something. But instead, he just stood there, silent, pretending it wasn't his problem. And when the chainsaws roared to life, when the branches started to fall, Julie felt something inside her break. For the first time, she saw the world for what it was, unfair, indifferent, and full of people who didn't care about the things she loved. And for the first time, she wondered if Bryce was one of those people. Even after the tree was gone, Julie never looked at Bryce the same way again. But that didn't mean she stopped trying. Years passed, and her crush never faded. She told herself that Bryce was still the same blue-eyed boy she had fallen for all those years ago, that he was just waiting for the right moment to notice her. And then, one day, something changed. Bryce's grandfather, Chet Duncan, moved in with his family, and he saw something in Julie that no one else did. Unlike Bryce, Chet admired Julie. He saw her for what she was, a girl full of life, passion, and a sense of wonder that most people lose as they grow up. One afternoon, as they sat in the backyard, Chet told Bryce something he never expected to hear. "That girl," he said, watching Julie across the street. "She's something special." Bryce didn't understand. "Special?" he scoffed. "She's weird." Chet shook his head. "No, son. She sees the world differently than most people. And that's not something to laugh at, it's something to admire." For the first time, Bryce paused. He had spent so long avoiding Julie, so long trying to pretend she didn't exist. But now, for the first time, he started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about her all along. As middle school turned into junior high, Julie found herself facing another challenge: her family's reputation. Unlike Bryce's family, who valued appearances and social status, Julie's family was humble, hard-working, and struggling to make ends meet. Her father, an artist, put everything he had into making their small home feel warm and full of love. But others didn't see it that way. Bryce's father, in particular, looked down on Julie's family, making offhand comments about their messy yard, their old house, their simple way of life. And little by little, Bryce started absorbing those ideas without even realizing it. Then came the eggs. One day, in an act of kindness, Julie brought fresh eggs from her family's chickens to Bryce's house. She had been raising them herself, waking up early every morning to care for them, feeling a sense of pride in what she had built. She thought Bryce would appreciate them. But what she didn't know was that Bryce had been secretly throwing the eggs away every morning, convinced that they were dirty because they came from her yard. For weeks, she never suspected a thing. Until the day she found out. When she finally learned the truth, something inside her shifted. For the first time since second grade, she stopped chasing Bryce. She stopped thinking about him. She stopped waiting for him to notice her, and she started seeing him for who he really was. Bryce, on the other hand, was beginning to see her for the first time. As the weeks passed, he started watching her the way she used to watch him. He started noticing the way she carried herself, the way she stood up for what she believed in, the way she made the world feel bigger and brighter just by being in it. And slowly, without even realizing it, he found himself falling for the girl he had spent his entire life trying to ignore. Bryce wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe it was when Julie stopped looking at him the way she used to, her bright, hopeful eyes now distant and unreadable. Maybe it was when he started catching himself staring at her from across the classroom, wondering why she suddenly seemed so out of reach. Or maybe it was when he realized that he actually missed her attention, missed the certainty of knowing that no matter how much he ignored her, she would always be there, waiting, watching, believing in him. But now, everything was different. Julie had changed, and for the first time in his life, Bryce was the one chasing after her. It wasn't something he admitted out loud, of course. At first, he tried to brush it off, convincing himself that he was just curious, that he was only noticing her because she had stopped noticing him. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He saw it in the way he kept thinking about their childhood, the way his grandfather's words played over and over in his head. That girl sees the world differently, and that's not something to laugh at, it's something to admire. He had spent years laughing. Now, he was starting to admire. But for Julie, the timing couldn't have been worse. After years of seeing Bryce through rose-colored glasses, she had finally begun to move on. The egg incident had been her wake-up call, the moment she realized that Bryce wasn't the person she had imagined him to be. He had never valued her the way she valued him. He had never looked at her and seen all the things she wished he would see. And now, she was tired of waiting for him to change. She had bigger things to think about anyway. Her family was going through financial struggles, and while she had always known they weren't as well off as others, it wasn't until now that she truly understood how much her parents had sacrificed for her. Her father, a quiet and thoughtful man, had always been her biggest inspiration. He was an artist, a dreamer, someone who found beauty in the smallest things. But now, Julie was beginning to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of their family's struggles on his shoulders. One evening, she overheard a conversation between her parents that shook her. They had been setting aside money for her mentally disabled uncle, David, who lived in a care facility. It was a responsibility they had taken on with love, but it had also meant putting aside their own dreams. Her father had given up his ambitions as a full-time artist to provide for his family, to make sure David had the care he needed. Julie had always loved her father's paintings, the way he captured the world in bold, sweeping colors. But now she saw them differently. Each unfinished canvas in their home wasn't just art, it was a sacrifice. For the first time, Julie realized how truly rich she was, not in money, but in love, in family, in the kind of support that couldn't be measured. And for the first time, she saw how empty Bryce's world was in comparison. Bryce's family had all the money, all the material things anyone could ask for. But his father was cold and distant, his mother quiet and defeated. His parents barely spoke to each other unless it was to argue, and their house, though picture-perfect on the outside, felt hollow on the inside. Julie had spent years envying him, thinking he had everything. But now she realized she wouldn't trade places with him for anything. And just as she was beginning to truly understand this, Bryce was beginning to see her with new eyes. He saw it in the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, even when others didn't understand her. He saw it in the way she stood up for what she believed in, even when it made her an outcast. And then, something happened that changed everything. One day at school, Garrett, Bryce's best friend, made a cruel comment about Julie's family, mocking their financial struggles, calling them trashy right in front of Bryce. Bryce had always gone along with Garrett's jokes, always laughed at the things he knew he shouldn't. But this time was different. For the first time, he felt disgusted. Not at Garrett, but at himself. At the years he had spent letting things like this happen. At the way he had watched people belittle Julie without ever defending her, without ever telling them that she was worth 100 of them. And without thinking, he shoved Garrett, knocking him backward, shocking everyone around them. The fight was brief, just a few heated words and a furious storm of emotions. But it was enough to sever their friendship, to make Bryce realize that he no longer belonged in the world he had spent so long trying to fit into. But it was too late. Julie had already let go of him. And now, Bryce had to prove that he wasn't the same boy he used to be. In a desperate attempt to show Julie that he had changed, Bryce made a bold decision. He took a sapling, a young sycamore tree, and planted it in her front yard. It was a quiet, wordless apology. A way to say, "I see you now. I finally understand." But Julie wasn't sure what to do with it. She had spent so long waiting for Bryce, only to finally let him go. And now, here he was, trying to pull her back in, trying to tell her he had changed. She wanted to believe him. But she had believed in him before, and she wasn't sure she could do it again. The next day, when Bryce saw her in the school hallway, he tried to talk to her. For the first time in his life, he was nervous. He called her name. She turned. Their eyes met. And then, she walked away. Bryce had never known what rejection felt like. Now he did. 4 days, he waited. He hoped. He wondered if the sapling in her yard would be enough, if she would understand what he was trying to say. And then, one evening, as the sun was setting, Julie did something that surprised them both. She walked outside. She stood in front of the tiny tree. And slowly, she began to dig. She was planting it. Bryce watched from his window, heart pounding, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a confession of love. But it was something. It was a start, and for now, that was enough. Julie Baker was a girl who saw the world in colors that no one else seemed to notice. From the moment she laid eyes on Bryce Losky, she was sure of one thing: he was special. Not because of anything he had done, but because she could see something in him, something that, to her, shone a little brighter than everything else. She loved fearlessly, without hesitation, without question. That was just the kind of person Julie was. She was stubborn in the best way, standing firm in her beliefs, even when the world around her didn't understand. Her love for the sycamore tree was more than just about climbing its branches. It was about finding beauty in places where others only saw inconvenience. To Julie, the tree was a piece of something bigger than herself, something worth protecting, something that made the world feel vast and endless. And so, when she lost it, it wasn't just a tree that was taken from her. It was a belief, a certainty that people would care if she cared enough. When she looked down from the branches that day and saw Bryce standing on the sidewalk, watching but not speaking, she learned something she hadn't wanted to learn: that not everyone saw the world the way she did. But Julie didn't break easily. Even after losing the tree, she kept seeing the good in people, kept believing in kindness, in small gestures, in things that couldn't be measured or counted. She cared for her family, even when others looked down on them. She nurtured her father's dreams, adored her disabled uncle, and appreciated the love her parents gave her, even when money was tight. She was someone who didn't need material wealth because she had something deeper, something more meaningful. And that was what made her stronger than Bryce ever realized. Bryce Losky, on the other hand, lived in a world where appearances mattered more than truth. He was born into a family that valued perfection, that taught him, intentionally or not, that being liked was more important than being good. His father was harsh and judgmental, his mother quiet and complicit, and his social standing was something he had learned to protect at all costs. From the time he was little, he had been afraid of standing out, afraid of making the wrong move. And so, when Julie Baker ran toward him with her wild enthusiasm, her boundless energy, her unshakable certainty that they belonged together, he panicked. Because deep down, he knew that being associated with her would make him stand out. And so, he did the easiest thing. He avoided her. He ignored her, let his friends mock her, laughed when they teased him about her crush. He kept his distance, never stopping to consider what his silence might mean. For years, he was content in his world of pretending. Julie chased him, and he ran, and that was just how things were. Until they weren't. Until he started noticing things he had ignored before. Like the way Julie saw things in ways he never could. Like the way she stood up for herself, for her family, for the things she loved. Like the way she didn't care what people thought, didn't change who she was just to fit in. Bryce had never met anyone like her before. And that terrified him. But the thing about perspective is that once it shifts, there's no going back. The moment his grandfather told him that Julie was someone worth admiring, something in Bryce cracked. He started seeing himself for what he was, the boy who had spent years running from something he didn't understand. And suddenly, he didn't want to run anymore. The problem was, Julie had already stopped chasing. For the first time, Bryce was the one watching from a distance, wondering what she was thinking. For the first time, he was the one feeling small, the one who was unsure, the one who wanted to reach out but didn't know how. And then, there was Chet Duncan, Bryce's grandfather, the only person in his family who truly understood what was happening. Chet was a man who had lived long enough to recognize what most people missed, the importance of seeing things for what they really were. He saw Julie not as some silly girl with a childhood crush, but as someone who had the kind of heart that most people spent their whole lives searching for. Chet was the first person to challenge Bryce's view of the world. The first to tell him that Julie wasn't the one who needed to change. He was. And as much as Bryce resisted, he knew deep down that his grandfather was right. Then there was Garrett, Bryce's best friend, the embodiment of everything Bryce used to be. Garrett was the voice in Bryce's head that told him to laugh at Julie, to keep his distance, to never admit what he was feeling. He was the one who made fun of her family, who saw the world in terms of popularity and status. And Bryce had listened to him. Until the moment he didn't. When Garrett insulted Julie's family, when he said things that Bryce suddenly realized were cruel, Bryce snapped. He shoved his best friend away and walked off, knowing that he was leaving behind more than just a friendship. He was leaving behind the version of himself that he no longer wanted to be. And that was the moment everything changed. Because in that instant, Bryce Losky finally became someone worth chasing. But Julie had spent years waiting, and she wasn't going to turn around so easily. She had outgrown the fantasy she had built in her head, the version of Bryce that never really existed. And now, for the first time, Bryce had to prove himself. That's what made the final moments of the story so powerful. Because Bryce didn't chase her down in some grand romantic gesture. He didn't give her a speech, didn't beg for a second chance. Instead, he planted a tree. A small sapling, placed carefully in her front yard. A quiet, wordless apology. A way to say, "I see you now." It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough to undo the past. But it was something. And in the end, that was all Julie needed to consider giving him a chance. Because love isn't about big, dramatic moments. It's about the small ones, the ones that show you someone is willing to change, willing to grow, willing to plant something and let it take root. And that's what Flipped was really about. Not love at first sight. Not instant happiness. But the slow, quiet way people can change, and how sometimes, if you're lucky, those changes bring you back to the person you were meant to find all along. The making of Flipped was just as special as the story itself. While the film feels effortless, filled with nostalgic warmth and timeless emotions, the production had its fair share of surprises, challenges, and strange occurrences that made it an unforgettable experience for the cast and crew. From unexpected weather changes to surprising actor connections, the making of Flipped was filled with little-known details that added layers of meaning to the final product. One of the most interesting aspects of Flipped was its dual-perspective storytelling, which was beautifully executed both in the script and in production. Director Rob Reiner wanted the audience to experience the world through both Bryce's and Julie's eyes, capturing how one event could be seen in two completely different ways. To make this happen, many scenes were shot twice, once from Bryce's point of view and then again from Julie's. This meant that the actors had to play their scenes with subtle differences, depending on whose perspective the audience was seeing. For example, in the classroom scene where Julie eagerly waves to Bryce and he nervously looks away, Madeline Carroll, Julie, had to play the moment with pure excitement and love in one take, and then more restrained and uncertain in another take. Callan McAuliffe, Bryce, on the other hand, had to shift between playing dismissive and playing secretly intrigued, depending on the viewpoint. These subtle shifts in performance made the final film feel layered, as if we were truly stepping inside the characters' minds. The film's setting plays a huge role in creating its nostalgic and timeless feel, but many fans don't realize that Flipped was not actually filmed in the 1950s or 60s neighborhoods that it appears to take place in. In fact, the entire movie was filmed in Michigan in 2009, carefully designed to replicate a bygone era. The production team went to great lengths to transform modern-day neighborhoods into something straight out of the past. They changed street signs, repainted houses, removed anything too modern, like satellite dishes and security cameras, and even replaced freshly paved roads with older-looking, cracked asphalt to make the town feel authentic. One of the biggest challenges was finding a real-life sycamore tree that could match the majestic one described in the book. Since the tree was such a crucial part of the story, the filmmakers needed something grand, something that would feel larger than life, just as Julie saw it. After months of searching, they finally found the perfect tree in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It had wide, stretching branches, deep roots, and an almost magical presence that made it feel like it had been there for centuries. But there was a problem. The tree was too tall and too difficult to safely film in. The production team worried that putting Madeline Carroll up there for real would be too dangerous, especially for long hours of shooting. So, they came up with an unusual solution. They built a massive replica of the tree's upper branches on a soundstage. Whenever you see Julie sitting in the tree, it's actually a combination of real-life shots of the sycamore and carefully constructed set pieces designed to blend seamlessly. The transition between the real tree and the fake branches was so well done that most audiences never noticed the difference. Madeline Carroll, who played Julie, was particularly excited about the tree scenes. She loved the idea of climbing it and feeling like she was truly in Julie's world. However, she later revealed in interviews that sitting in the tree for long hours was a lot harder than she expected. Despite this, she still considers those scenes to be some of her favorite moments in the film. Callan McAuliffe, who played Bryce, had his own unexpected challenge. He had to learn how to convincingly play a nervous, shy character when, in reality, he was much more confident in real life. "Bryce is really awkward around Julie," he explained, "but I'm actually pretty comfortable talking to people. I had to practice looking embarrassed and unsure, which was kind of funny because I'm not really like that." His nervous gestures, the way he stumbles over his words, the way he avoids eye contact, the way he fidgets when he's near Julie, were all things he had to consciously add to his performance. But his real-life confidence didn't stop him from getting flustered in one particular scene, the kitchen moment where Bryce's grandfather, Chet, praises Julie. Chet, played by the legendary John Mahoney, best known for his role in Frasier, brought such depth and wisdom to the scene that Callan found himself genuinely moved. "That wasn't acting," Callan later said in an interview. "When he looked at me and said, 'She's something special,' I really felt it. It was like my own grandfather was giving me advice." John Mahoney's performance was one of the most praised elements of the film, and it turns out that his character wasn't just acting. He truly admired Madeline Carroll in real life. "She had this old soul quality," he once said. "She reminded me of someone who had lived 100 lives before this one." Even though the movie was about kids coming of age, the adult cast members also felt deeply connected to the story. Aidan Quinn, who played Julie's father, admitted that the movie made him reflect on his own childhood, especially the moments when parents make sacrifices that children don't realize until they grow up. One of the biggest hidden Easter eggs in the film comes from Rob Reiner himself. In one scene, when Julie and Bryce are in class, the name Meathead is written on the chalkboard. This was an inside joke referring to Reiner's character from the classic sitcom All in the Family, where he played a character often called Meathead by his TV father-in-law, Archie Bunker. Another fun fact is that the scene where Bryce tries to hold Julie's hand during the Basket Boy auction was originally written differently. In the book, the moment is much subtler, but Reiner wanted to make it a bigger, more dramatic shift in Bryce's character. So, in an unscripted moment, Callan McAuliffe grabbed Madeline Carroll's hand with a determined look in his eyes, as if Bryce had finally gathered all his courage. The reaction you see from Carroll, slightly shocked, slightly unsure, is 100% real, because she wasn't expecting it. The ending of the movie is also something that fans often debate. Unlike most love stories, Flipped doesn't end with a big kiss, a grand gesture, or a final declaration of love. Instead, it ends with a quiet, meaningful moment, Julie planting the sapling Bryce gave her, and Bryce watching from a distance, hopeful, waiting. This was a deliberate choice. Rob Reiner wanted the story to feel authentic, to reflect real life rather than movie cliches. In real relationships, things aren't always tied up in a perfect bow. Sometimes, love grows in quiet ways, through small actions rather than grand words. To this day, Flipped remains one of the most beloved yet underrated coming-of-age films ever made. While it didn't become a blockbuster upon release, it found new life over the years, with audiences discovering its beauty through word of mouth and streaming platforms. The movie's legacy continues, proving that some stories, no matter how simple, can leave a lasting impact. And much like the sycamore tree in Julie's heart, Flipped has taken root in the hearts of those who truly see its beauty. Flipped is a film that sneaks up on you. At first glance, it appears to be a simple, nostalgic coming-of-age story, but beneath its quiet moments and tender storytelling, it unfolds into something far more profound. It is a film about perspective, about the slow unraveling of childhood illusions, and about the weight of small moments that shape who we become. The film doesn't rely on dramatic, sweeping conflicts or exaggerated emotions. Instead, it focuses on the subtleties of human nature, the quiet shift in emotions, and the realization that love, real, lasting love, isn't about grand gestures but about truly seeing someone for who they are. One of the most fascinating aspects of Flipped is its dual perspective structure. The story is told twice, first through Julie's eyes, then through Bryce's. This narrative technique is rare in film but adds an entirely new layer of depth to the story. It forces the audience to reevaluate everything they just saw, to question how much of what they perceive is influenced by the limited view they are given. This structure is not just a clever storytelling trick, it is integral to the film's message. Flipped is about how perception shapes our reality, how the same moment can mean something entirely different to two people, and how real understanding only comes when we step outside of ourselves. By giving us both perspectives, the film subtly asks us to reconsider our own assumptions about people, to recognize that there is always another side to every story. One of the most critical moments in the film comes in the form of an event that, on the surface, seems almost trivial, the cutting down of the sycamore tree. But this moment serves as a turning point, a loss of innocence, and a symbol of how differently Bryce and Julie view the world. For Julie, the tree is a sanctuary, a place of beauty, a reminder that there are things in life that should be cherished simply because they exist. She climbs it, sits in its branches, and sees the world in a way that no one else does. The tree represents her ability to find joy in the unnoticed, to see beyond the surface. For Bryce, however, the tree is just a tree. He doesn't understand why Julie cares so much, why she's willing to embarrass herself by fighting to keep it standing. And worse, he doesn't try to understand. When the workers arrive to cut it down, he stands by and says nothing, unwilling to take a stand. This is one of the first moments in the film where Julie's unwavering belief in Bryce begins to waver. Until now, she has seen him through rose-colored glasses, believing he is special, believing that his silence is something temporary, that deep down, he must feel the same things she does. But in that moment, she realizes something heartbreaking. Bryce doesn't see what she sees. And maybe he never will. This is a major theme in the film, the idea that perception and understanding do not always align. Julie sees the world as it could be, full of depth, meaning, and beauty. Bryce sees the world as it is, shaped by what others expect him to be. For much of the film, Bryce is a passive character. He does what is expected of him, follows the crowd, and avoids confrontation at all costs. His inability to stand up for Julie, to defend her, to recognize her value, is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of fear. The egg scene is another moment that plays a significant role in the film's emotional depth. Julie, in an act of kindness, brings fresh eggs from her family's chickens to Bryce's house. She believes it's a small, thoughtful gesture, a way of connecting with him, of showing that she cares. But Bryce, embarrassed by his father's judgment of Julie's family, secretly throws the eggs away every morning. To the audience, this is an infuriating moment, one that highlights just how much Bryce still cares about appearances, about what others think of him. He is too afraid to simply accept a kind gesture, too caught up in his own social fears to appreciate what Julie is offering. And when she finds out, her entire perception of him begins to collapse. This moment is not just about the eggs. It is about betrayal, about realizing that the person you've admired for so long might not be worthy of that admiration. Julie's heart doesn't break because of the eggs, it breaks because she finally sees Bryce for what he is. And for the first time in her life, she chooses to walk away. This leads to one of the most crucial aspects of the film, Bryce's realization that he has spent his whole life being a coward. One of the most compelling elements of Bryce's character arc is that his change does not come from a single moment of transformation. There is no grand epiphany, no sudden, dramatic declaration of love. Instead, his change is slow, subtle, and filled with hesitation. He doesn't fall for Julie in the way she once fell for him. He grows into his feelings, little by little, as he starts to see what was always right in front of him. And part of this growth comes from his relationship with his grandfather, Chet. Chet serves as Bryce's moral compass, the one person in his family who truly understands what matters. He sees Julie's worth immediately, recognizes her as someone special, someone who sees the world in a way that most people never will. And when he tells Bryce this, something shifts. For the first time, Bryce begins to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he has spent his whole life being blind. This realization culminates in one of the most powerful moments of the film, Bryce planting the sycamore tree sapling in Julie's yard. This moment is significant because it is not an apology. Bryce doesn't say anything. He doesn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he acts. He chooses to plant something, to grow something, to give back what was taken. It is a quiet, wordless acknowledgement that he finally understands what Julie saw all along. And it is this moment, not a kiss, not a confession, not a sweeping romantic gesture, that suggests a real future between them. The film does not end with certainty. It does not tell us whether Julie forgives Bryce, whether she falls for him again, whether they will end up together. Instead, it ends with a possibility. Julie, standing in her front yard, looking at the tree. Bryce, watching from a distance, waiting. It is an ending filled with hope, with quiet understanding, with a feeling that sometimes love does not happen in an instant. Sometimes it grows. And that is what makes Flipped so emotionally resonant. It is not a story about love at first sight. It is a story about perception, growth, and the slow, often painful process of seeing people for who they truly are. It is a story that reminds us that love is not about grand declarations. It is about the small moments, the quiet gestures, the choices that show who we truly are. And in the end, Flipped leaves us with a simple yet powerful message. Sometimes, the greatest love stories are the ones that take time to bloom. The making of Flipped was just as delicate and thoughtful as the story itself. Unlike large-scale Hollywood productions filled with CGI effects and elaborate action sequences, this film was built on quiet moments, natural beauty, and a deep emotional core. Director Rob Reiner wanted to capture the authenticity of childhood and first love, and every decision made during production reflected that goal. From choosing the perfect filming locations to working closely with the young actors, the filmmakers put their hearts into making Flipped feel as real and nostalgic as possible. The 1960s setting, the carefully crafted dialogue, and the warmth of the cinematography all played a role in bringing the story to life. But behind the scenes, there were many surprises, challenges, and even a few unexpected moments that made the filmmaking process unique. One of the biggest challenges was finding the right locations to film in. Even though the movie was released in 2010, the story takes place in the late 1950s and early 1960s. That meant the production team had to work extra hard to make sure every detail, from the houses to the streets to the small objects in the background, felt like they belonged to another era. Instead of using digital effects to create an old-fashioned look, the filmmakers decided to find real locations that already had a timeless feel. The movie was filmed in Michigan, in small towns that still had a vintage charm. Neighborhoods were carefully selected for their classic, mid-century houses, and the production team worked to remove any modern elements that could ruin the illusion. Street signs, mailboxes, and even the pavement were altered to match the time period. The production crew went as far as covering modern sidewalks with dirt and strategically placing old cars in driveways to create the perfect 1960s atmosphere. Every detail had to be carefully adjusted, from the types of bicycles the kids rode to the books they carried to school. But the biggest location challenge was finding the perfect sycamore tree. Since the tree was such an important symbol in the story, the production team spent months searching for one that matched Julie Baker's description in the book. It had to be tall, majestic, and surrounded by enough space for it to feel like its own little world. After looking at dozens of trees, the team finally found one in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It was perfect, massive, with wide branches stretching toward the sky, exactly the way Julie would have seen it. But there was a problem. The tree was too high and too unstable to safely film long scenes in. Madeline Carroll, who played Julie, wanted to climb it for real, but the crew knew it would be too dangerous to keep her up there for hours of filming. So, the team came up with a creative solution. They built a life-sized replica of the tree's upper branches on a soundstage. The replica was so realistic that most audiences never realized part of the tree wasn't real. Madeline Carroll was filmed in the studio version of the tree for close-up shots, while wide shots used the real tree. Although she didn't get to stay in the real tree for long, Carroll loved those scenes the most. She later said that sitting in the tree, whether real or fake, made her feel just like Julie, connected to something bigger than herself. Callan McAuliffe, who played Bryce, had his own behind-the-scenes challenges. Unlike his character, who struggles with confidence, McAuliffe was naturally outgoing. He had to practice looking nervous and unsure, especially in scenes where Bryce avoids Julie or fumbles over his words. One of the funniest moments behind the scenes happened during the basket boy auction scene. In the film, Bryce is auctioned off as part of a school fundraiser, where girls bid on boys to win a picnic date. The scene was already awkward for Bryce, but McAuliffe admitted that filming it was even more embarrassing. "I had to sit there and pretend I was completely uncomfortable," he said in an interview, "but the truth is, it was just as awkward in real life." The auction scene required multiple takes, and since the bidding girls were supposed to be excited and competitive, they often got carried away. In some takes, the actresses shouted louder than expected or jumped up too fast, causing the extras in the background to laugh, ruining the take. But the moment that completely caught McAuliffe off guard was when the girl sitting next to Julie, who wins the bid on him, ad-libbed an exaggerated flirty reaction after the scene was over. "I had no idea she was going to do that," McAuliffe said. "It totally threw me off." Director Reiner encouraged the young actors to improvise when they felt comfortable, making sure that the dialogue and reactions felt natural. This approach helped make Flipped feel genuine and true to life. Reiner himself was deeply passionate about the project. He had previously directed classics like Stand By Me and When Harry Met Sally, and he felt that Flipped was one of the most personal films he had ever worked on. He believed that the story perfectly captured what it feels like to grow up, to change, and to realize that love isn't just about excitement, it's about truly understanding another person. One small hidden detail in the film is a nod to Reiner's own acting past. In the school scene, if you look closely at the chalkboard, you'll see the name Meathead written in the background. This is a reference to Reiner's character from the classic TV show All in the Family, where he played Michael Meathead Stivic. One of the most memorable moments in the film was the scene where Bryce tries to hold Julie's hand after realizing his feelings for her. This moment wasn't in the book exactly as it appears in the film. Reiner wanted the scene to feel like a real turning point for Bryce, like he was finally stepping out of his comfort zone. So instead of a quiet realization, Reiner had McAuliffe physically reach for Carroll's hand, in a spontaneous, almost desperate way. Carroll's surprised reaction? Completely real. "She wasn't expecting it," McAuliffe later said. "And that's why the moment works so well." Although Flipped was not a major box office hit when it was released, it slowly became a cult favorite, especially among younger audiences who discovered it on streaming platforms. People connected with its authenticity, its gentle storytelling, and the way it made them think about the moments in their own lives that changed everything. Today, Flipped is one of those rare films that continues to grow in popularity long after its release. It's the kind of movie that, much like Julie's Sycamore Tree, stands the test of time, waiting for the right people to see its beauty. And for those who do, it is impossible to forget. The world of Flipped is a place that feels like stepping into a memory. Soft, golden, timeless. The film setting is more than just a backdrop. It is an essential part of the story, shaping the way characters interact, the way emotions unfold, and the way the audience experiences the journey. Every street, every house, every carefully placed detail serves a purpose, immersing us in a world that feels familiar yet distant, nostalgic yet deeply personal. From the moment the film begins, there is a warmth to the visuals, a feeling of looking through an old photograph album, where every moment feels precious. The story takes place in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and this setting is crucial in creating the film's gentle, sentimental tone. It allows us to experience a time when life was simpler, when emotions weren't hidden behind screens, and when a single glance could mean everything. Director Reiner was adamant about capturing the innocence and simplicity of this time period, ensuring that every element, from the costumes to the neighborhood to the way the sunlight filters through the trees, felt authentic to an era long past. Unlike many modern coming-of-age films that rely on fast-paced editing, dramatic lighting, and bold colors, Flipped takes a softer, more natural approach. The film uses light and space to create intimacy, making the audience feel as if they are sitting in the same classroom, standing on the same street, or peering into the same windows as the characters. One of the most important locations in the film is, of course, the neighborhood where Bryce and Julie live. Their houses stand across the street from each other, separated only by a narrow road that feels, at times, like the longest distance in the world. This physical closeness is an essential part of the film's emotional landscape. For years, Julie watches Bryce from her porch, certain that he is the boy of her dreams. For years, Bryce avoids her gaze, pretending she doesn't exist. Their homes are so close, yet their worlds are so far apart. The film emphasizes this by using wide shots that show just how near they are to each other, yet how emotionally distant they remain. The cinematography plays with perspective, mirroring the dual narrative structure of the film. Scenes are often shot twice, once from Julie's point of view and once from Bryce's. This technique allows the audience to experience the same moment through two completely different emotional lenses, reinforcing the film's central theme. We do not see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Perhaps the most visually striking setting in the film is Julie's beloved sycamore tree. This tree is not just a piece of scenery. It is a symbol, a character in itself, a place of transformation. When we first see the tree through Julie's eyes, it is enormous, radiant, a living masterpiece. The sunlight filters through its leaves, casting golden shadows on her face, making the world feel limitless and full of wonder. She climbs its branches like she belongs there, as if she is part of something greater than herself. The cinematography lingers on wide, sweeping shots that make the tree feel mythical, larger than life, a world apart from the reality below. But when we see the tree through Bryce's eyes, it is just a tree. Nothing special. Just branches and leaves and bark. This contrast is crucial to understanding how cinematography is used to reflect perception. The same object, the same place, the same experience, but completely different depending on who is looking at it. This shift is also present in the way the film handles color. Julie's world is bathed in warm, golden hues. Everything she sees is alive, filled with meaning, touched by something deeper. Bryce's world, in contrast, is cooler, more muted. His home, though expensive and well-kept, feels sterile, uninviting. The lighting is harsher, more artificial, reflecting his rigid, image-conscious upbringing. One of the most subtle yet powerful elements of Flip's visual storytelling is how the use of space changes as Bryce begins to see Julie differently. At the start of the film, there is always distance between them. In classroom scenes, they sit far apart. When they pass each other in the hallways, the camera emphasizes the space between them. Even when they speak, there is always something in the way, a fence, a wall, a street. But as the film progresses and Bryce starts to realize what he has been blind to all along, the camera slowly brings them closer together. By the end of the film, when Bryce watches Julie planting the sapling he gave her, there is no distance anymore. The moment isn't dramatic or loud. It is quiet. A soft, simple frame of a boy watching a girl, hoping she will turn around. The use of silence in this final scene is a testament to how Flipped relies on subtlety rather than spectacle. Instead of grand romantic declarations, swelling music, or dramatic gestures, the film allows emotion to be felt in the stillness. This is why the cinematography and setting of Flipped are so important. They create a world that doesn't tell you how to feel, but invites you to feel it for yourself. Beyond the visual elements, the film's sound design and music also play a crucial role in shaping its emotional tone. Unlike many modern romantic films that rely on pop music to create energy, Flipped uses soft instrumentals and gentle 1960s tunes that complement its nostalgic atmosphere. The music doesn't overpower the story, it enhances it. One of the most memorable musical moments is when Julie is sitting in her tree, lost in the beauty of the world, and Let It Be Me by the Everly Brothers plays. The soft harmonies and poetic lyrics make the moment feel timeless, as if we are suspended in a memory that will never fade. And then, of course, there is the silence. Some of the most powerful scenes in Flipped are those where nothing is said at all. Like when Julie finds out Bryce has been throwing away her eggs and simply walks away, leaving him in stunned silence. Or when Bryce tries to hold Julie's hand at the Basket Boy auction, and she hesitates, looking at him for the first time not as someone she adores, but as someone she isn't sure she trusts. Or the final scene, when Julie stands in her yard, planting the tree. No words are spoken, but the weight of everything, the past, the present, the possibility of what's to come, is felt in every frame. This is the beauty of Flipped. It is a film that trusts the audience to feel, rather than telling them what to feel. And this is what makes its setting and cinematic elements so powerful. Every house, every street, every golden ray of sunlight, every shadow cast by the sycamore tree. All of it works together to tell a story that is not just about love, but about how we see the world. And in the end, Flipped leaves us with a simple truth. The world doesn't change, but the way we see it does. The making of Flipped was as heartfelt and nostalgic as the film itself. From the moment director Rob Reiner decided to bring Wendelin Van Draanen's novel to life, he was committed to making every detail feel authentic. The movie wasn't just about capturing a story. It was about capturing a feeling, a time, a sense of childhood innocence that stays with us forever. On set, the cast and crew worked together like a close-knit family. The movie was filled with young actors stepping into their biggest roles yet, seasoned veterans who brought wisdom and warmth, and a director who knew exactly how to guide them into delivering performances that felt natural and true to life. But, as with every film, there were plenty of surprises, funny mishaps, and unexpected challenges along the way. Finding the perfect Julie and Bryce. From the start, casting was one of the most important aspects of the production. The entire movie relied on the audience believing in Julie Baker and Bryce Losky as real people. Two kids experiencing the ups and downs of growing up, falling in love, and learning who they really are. Rob Reiner knew that if the audience didn't connect with Julie and Bryce, the whole film would fall apart. He needed actors who could carry the emotional weight of the story but still feel like everyday kids. For Julie Baker, Reiner needed someone with warmth, intelligence, and a quiet strength. Someone who wasn't just playing a strong-willed girl but truly understood what it meant to believe in something bigger than yourself. When Madeline Carroll walked in to audition, Reiner knew almost instantly that she was perfect. She just had this light, he later said. You could see it in her eyes. She was Julie. Carroll, who had already acted in several films before Flipped, was thrilled when she got the role. I had read the book, and I just loved Julie, she said in an interview. She wasn't like other girls in movies. She wasn't waiting for someone to tell her who she was. She already knew. For Bryce Losky, the search was a little tougher. Reiner needed an actor who could show Bryce's transformation, from a shallow, insecure kid to someone who finally starts to see the world differently. After auditioning dozens of actors, they found Callan McAuliffe, a young Australian actor with an effortless charm. McAuliffe had to tone down his natural confidence to play Bryce, who spends much of the film stumbling over his words, struggling to make sense of his feelings. I'm not really shy like Bryce, McAuliffe admitted. So I had to practice looking nervous, stammering, and kind of avoiding eye contact. It was harder than I thought. Reiner helped McAuliffe find the right balance, making Bryce awkward but still likable, hesitant but still real. The tree that almost wasn't. One of the biggest challenges in making Flipped was finding Julie's sycamore tree. In the book, The tree is a massive, beautiful, towering thing. A place where Julie feels safe, where she sees the world in a way no one else does. The filmmakers knew they couldn't fake it. They had to find a real tree that felt just as magical as the one in the story. After searching all over Michigan, they finally found the perfect sycamore tree. It was huge, with wide branches that stretched out like arms welcoming the sky. The only problem? It was too high for the actors to safely climb. Madeline Carroll, who loved the idea of being up in the tree for real, was disappointed when she found out she wouldn't actually be climbing it. "They told me, you're going to be in a studio, and we're going to build part of the tree for you," she said. I was like, "Wait, what? But I want to climb it for real." To make it work, the crew built a massive replica of the tree's upper branches on a soundstage. They carefully matched the real tree's bark, the way the leaves moved, and even how the light filtered through the branches. And even though Carroll wasn't actually high up in the real tree, she said the set was so realistic that it felt just as magical. "When I was up there, I really felt like Julie," she said. "I got why she loved it so much." The most awkward scene to film. For Callan McAuliffe, one of the most uncomfortable scenes to shoot was the basket boy auction. In the movie, Bryce is put up for auction as part of a school tradition where girls bid on boys for a picnic date. McAuliffe admitted that filming the scene was a little embarrassing because all the girls had to yell, cheer, and bid on him over and over again. "They were getting way too into it," he joked. "It felt like a real auction." What made it worse? Some of the extras kept breaking character by laughing in the background, which meant they had to reshoot the scene multiple times. But the most surprising moment? The hand-holding scene, where Bryce finally tries to reach for Julie's hand, wasn't scripted exactly as it played out. Reiner wanted it to feel natural, so he told McAuliffe to grab Carroll's hand suddenly, without warning. The look of shock on Julie's face? Totally real. "She had no idea I was going to do it at that exact moment," McAuliffe said. "That's why she pulls back like that. It wasn't acting, it was just surprise." The grandpa everyone loved. One of the most beloved characters in the movie was Chet Duncan, Bryce's grandfather, played by John Mahoney. Mahoney, best known for playing Frasier's father on Frasier, brought a quiet wisdom to the role. Off-screen, Mahoney was just as warm and kind as his character. Madeline Carroll later said that Mahoney gave her real-life advice during filming. "He told me, always be proud of who you are, even if other people don't see it yet." And I never forgot that. Mahoney's performance was so powerful that even Callan McAuliffe got emotional in their scenes together. When he looked at me and said, "She's something special," I swear I wasn't acting in that moment, McAuliffe said. I really felt like I was learning something from him. A set full of laughter. Despite the emotional depth of the film, the set of Flipped was full of laughter. Rob Reiner, known for his sense of humor, often cracked jokes between takes. Madeline Carroll and Callan McAuliffe, even though their characters had a complicated relationship, became great friends. One of the funniest moments? During a scene where Julie's chickens escape, some of the real chickens used for filming ran off the set, and the crew had to chase them down. "We were all running around trying to catch chickens," Carroll said. "It was ridiculous." The film that found its audience. When Flipped was released, it wasn't a huge box office hit. But over time, it became something more. It became a film that people held close to their hearts. Through word of mouth, streaming platforms, and recommendations from those who truly understood its beauty, Flipped became a cult favorite. It is a film that wasn't made to be flashy or loud, it was made to be felt. And because of that, it will always be remembered. There is something quietly profound about Flipped. At first glance, it seems like a simple story, a tale of childhood infatuation, awkward misunderstandings, and the slow realization of love. But beneath its soft, nostalgic exterior, the film is layered with deep themes and rich symbolism, making it more than just a coming-of-age romance. It is a film about seeing, about understanding, about how we grow into the people we are meant to be. One of the most prominent themes in Flipped is perception, how two people can experience the same events in completely different ways. The movie is told through two perspectives, switching between Julie Baker and Bryce Losky, allowing us to see the way their thoughts and feelings evolve over time. This dual narrative isn't just a storytelling technique. It is a reflection of how human beings navigate relationships, how we assume things about others, and how our views can change once we take the time to truly see someone. Julie sees Bryce as a boy filled with potential, someone special, someone worth waiting for. From the moment she meets him, she is convinced that there is something about him that sets him apart. Her admiration for him isn't based on anything he has done, it is based on who she believes he could be. But Bryce doesn't see himself that way. From his perspective, Julie is too much, too eager, too intense, too different. He doesn't appreciate the way she looks at him because he hasn't yet learned how to value what truly matters. He is blinded by his desire to fit in, to be liked, to avoid anything that could make him stand out. As the film progresses, these perceptions begin to shift. Julie slowly realizes that Bryce isn't the person she imagined. She sees that his silence, his reluctance to stand up for what's right, and his fear of being different make him weaker than she ever realized. And at the same time, Bryce begins to see Julie for the first time, not as an annoyance, not as someone to avoid, but as someone who has always been more than he could understand. This slow change in perception is beautifully symbolized in one of the film's most important visual elements, the sycamore tree. Julie's love for the tree isn't just about its size or beauty. To her, it is a symbol of everything that matters: nature, freedom, perspective, and the ability to see the world from a higher place. When she climbs the tree, she sees beyond the houses, beyond the streets, beyond the limits of ordinary life. She feels connected to something larger than herself, something timeless and unshakable. But Bryce doesn't understand. To him, the tree is just a tree. He doesn't see what she sees. He doesn't understand why she fights to save it, why it means so much to her, why she refuses to let it go. And that is what makes the tree's destruction so powerful. When the sycamore tree is cut down, it isn't just a loss of something physical. It is the loss of innocence, the loss of belief, the loss of the idea that people will always do the right thing. Julie begs for the tree to be saved. She believes, with all her heart, that if she just explains why it matters, someone will listen. But no one does. And as the branches fall, so does Julie's unwavering belief in Bryce. For the first time, she sees him standing there, silent, watching, doing nothing. And she realizes something she had never considered before: Bryce may not be the person she thought he was. This moment is a turning point because it introduces another key theme: courage. Throughout the film, Julie is brave. She is brave enough to be different. Brave enough to love things without needing approval. Brave enough to stand up for what she believes in, even when she stands alone. Bryce, on the other hand, is afraid. He is afraid of what people think, afraid of standing out, afraid of being associated with someone like Julie because it might make him look bad. But as the film unfolds, Bryce begins to realize that fear is not strength. Avoiding conflict is not the same as being kind. And sometimes, doing nothing is worse than doing the wrong thing. This realization comes to a head in one of the most painful moments of the movie, the egg incident. Julie, in her usual way, does something thoughtful and kind. She brings Bryce's family fresh eggs from her chickens, believing she is offering them something valuable, something pure. But Bryce, still ruled by his father's judgment and his own immaturity, throws them away every morning without telling her. When Julie finds out, it is not just about the eggs. It is about betrayal. It is about realizing that Bryce never truly valued her kindness, that he took and discarded it without a second thought. And so, for the first time, Julie lets him go. This shift in power is what makes the final moments of Flipped so emotionally satisfying. For years, Julie had been the one chasing Bryce, waiting for him to notice her. Now, Bryce is the one who realizes he was blind. And in one final poetic act of understanding, he plants a sapling in Julie's yard, a new sycamore tree. This moment is filled with symbolism. The tree represents growth, renewal, and a second chance. It is Bryce's way of saying, "I see now. I understand. And I want to be better." The beauty of this ending is that it does not wrap everything up neatly. There is no grand love confession, no dramatic moment where Julie runs into Bryce's arms. Instead, there is a quiet moment of possibility. Julie stands outside, looking at the tree, considering what it means. And Bryce watches, waiting. The film leaves us with a question, rather than an answer. Will Julie forgive him? Will Bryce truly change? Will they find their way to each other, not because of fate, but because they both choose to? That is what makes Flipped so powerful. It is a film about seeing people for who they truly are. It is about letting go of illusions and embracing the reality that love is not instant. It is something that must be earned. And it is about the quiet, unseen moments that shape us, the choices we make, the way we grow, and the way we finally begin to see the world as it really is. Because in the end, the greatest love stories are not about fate. They are about learning, changing, and flipping our own perspectives, one small moment at a time. The magic of Flipped lies not just in its story, but in how it was told. Every frame, every note of music, every subtle cut in the editing room worked together to create a film that feels like a memory. Warm, gentle, and timeless. Reiner, a filmmaker known for his ability to capture emotional authenticity, knew that this story needed to be told with careful attention to detail, using filmmaking techniques that would immerse the audience in its world. Unlike many modern coming-of-age films that rely on fast cuts, heavy visual effects, or exaggerated drama, Flipped takes a different approach. It slows down, allowing moments to breathe, making us feel the emotions of the characters rather than rushing through them. One of the most distinctive filmmaking choices was the decision to tell the story from two perspectives. This was a challenge, not just in terms of writing, but in how to visually communicate two different ways of seeing the same world. The film's narrative is structured in a way that constantly shifts between Julie's and Bryce's points of view. Scenes are often repeated, but not in a lazy, redundant way. Instead, the cinematography, lighting, and even the framing change subtly to reflect the emotions of the character whose perspective we are following. For example, when we see Bryce's version of events, the camera often uses medium or distant shots, keeping things at a comfortable, detached distance. His world is one of avoidance, hesitation, and fear of looking too closely. The colors in his world are often cooler, more muted, reflecting how he sees life, practical, unremarkable, and focused on surface appearances. But when the film shifts to Julie's perspective, everything changes. The camera moves in closer, bringing the audience into her emotions, making everything feel more vivid. Soft sunlight filters through trees, warm colors dominate the screen, and the world seems bigger, brighter, and full of beauty. The most striking example of this contrast is Julie's beloved sycamore tree. When we see it through her eyes, the camera sweeps upward, emphasizing its grandeur. The lighting makes it glow, making it feel almost magical, like something out of a dream. But when we see the same tree through Bryce's perspective, it is just a tree. The framing is different. The camera remains at a distance, shooting it from a lower, less dramatic angle. There is no glow, no magic, just branches and leaves. This contrast in cinematography reinforces the central theme of the movie: perspective. We do not see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Another filmmaking technique that shaped the movie's atmosphere was the use of sound design and music. Flipped does not rely on a loud, overbearing soundtrack to force emotions. Instead, it carefully chooses music that enhances the mood without overpowering the scene. The film features a mix of classic 1950s and 60s songs, soft instrumentals, and natural sounds like the rustling of leaves or the distant laughter of children. One of the most beautiful musical moments in the film comes when Julie sits in her sycamore tree, lost in thought, while Let It Be Me by the Everly Brothers plays. The gentle harmonies and nostalgic lyrics perfectly match Julie's view of the world, hopeful, innocent, filled with love for the simple beauty around her. But music is not the only element of sound design that plays a role in storytelling. Silence is also used powerfully. Some of the most emotional moments in the movie come not from what is said, but from what is left unsaid. For example, when Julie realizes that Bryce has been throwing away the eggs she gave him, the scene does not need dramatic music or shouting. Instead, we get a quiet pause, a moment of stillness, of realization, of heartbreak. Julie simply turns and walks away, and the sound of her footsteps is the only thing we hear. The choice to let silence speak in these moments makes the emotions feel more raw, more real, more like something we have all experienced in our own lives. Editing also plays a crucial role in shaping the film's tone and pacing. Many coming-of-age films rely on quick cuts, sharp transitions, and flashy effects. But Flipped takes a slower, more natural approach. Scenes often unfold in longer takes, allowing the audience to truly sink into the emotions of the moment. One of the best examples of this is the dinner scene at Bryce's house, when his grandfather, Chet, praises Julie. Instead of cutting quickly between reactions, the camera lingers on Bryce's face, letting us see the slow realization forming in his mind, that maybe Julie is someone special, after all. These extended shots give weight to the emotions, making us feel them along with the characters. Lighting also plays a key role in reinforcing the themes of perception and emotional transformation. Julie's world is often bathed in warm, golden light. The sun filters through her window, creating a soft, dreamlike glow whenever she speaks about the things she loves. Bryce's world, by contrast, is often lit more harshly, with cooler tones and sharper contrasts. His home, though well-kept and expensive, feels sterile, almost lifeless. The difference in lighting subtly highlights how their environments shape them, how Julie is surrounded by warmth and love, while Bryce lives in a home where image matters more than connection. As the film progresses and Bryce begins to see things differently, the lighting around him gradually warms. By the final scene, when he plants the sycamore tree sapling in Julie's yard, the light has fully changed. The golden hues that once belonged only to Julie's world now surround Bryce as well, symbolizing that he has finally learned to see the beauty she saw all along. Despite all these masterful filmmaking choices, Flipped was not a huge box office success upon its release. Released in 2010, it had a modest budget of around $14 million and earned only about $4.3 million in domestic theaters. Many critics at the time were unsure of how to categorize it. Today, it is considered one of the most beloved coming-of-age films of its generation. It is not a movie that shouts, it is a movie that whispers. And that is exactly why it lingers in the hearts of those who truly see it. The magic of Flipped wasn't just in its storytelling or its nostalgic, dreamy visuals, it was also in the people who brought it to life. From the young actors who captured the innocence and awkwardness of first love to the seasoned veterans who infused their roles with quiet wisdom, every member of the cast played an essential role in making the film feel as warm and authentic as it did. But behind the camera, things were just as interesting. The cast bonded, the director guided them with care, and fans who discovered the film long after its release turned it into a beloved classic. One of the most important casting decisions was, of course, finding the perfect Julie Baker and Bryce Loskey. Madeline Carroll as Julie Baker, the girl who saw the world differently. When Madeline Carroll walked into her audition, she wasn't just reading lines, she was already Julie. Director Rob Reiner later said that the moment she spoke, he knew she was perfect for the role. She had this fire in her, he explained. You could see it in her eyes. She didn't just play Julie, she was Julie. Carroll, who had already built a career in film and television, immediately connected with the character. I read the book before I auditioned, and I just fell in love with her, she said in an interview. Julie is so strong, so independent, and she doesn't let anyone tell her what to think. I wanted to play her because she reminded me of who I wanted to be. But there was one scene she was particularly nervous about. The part where Julie finds out that Bryce has been throwing away the eggs, she said, laughing. That was tough. Because I had to play it completely different from how I'd played Julie the whole movie. She's always so full of energy, so full of life, but in that moment, she's just done. Carroll worked closely with Reiner to make sure that moment felt real. We talked about how sometimes it's not the big dramatic moments that hurt the most, it's the quiet ones, she explained. So instead of getting angry, I just walked away. And I think that was even more powerful. Callan McAuliffe as Bryce Losky, the boy who had to learn to see. For Bryce, Reiner needed an actor who could pull off both sides of his character. The shallow, unsure kid at the start of the movie and the boy who slowly learns to see the world differently by the end. Australian actor Callan McAuliffe won the role, even though he had never played an American character before. They told me I had to lose my accent, he said. So I spent weeks just listening to American kids talk, trying to get it right. McAuliffe had an interesting challenge. He had to make Bryce likable, even when he was making the wrong choices. You don't want the audience to hate him, he explained. Because then you don't care if he changes. You have to see that there's something good in him, even when he's being a bit of a coward. The most challenging scene for him wasn't the emotional ones. It was the basket boy auction. Oh, that scene was embarrassing, he admitted, shaking his head. All these girls had to yell and bid on me, and we had to do it over and over again. I don't think I've ever been so uncomfortable in my life. But McAuliffe's favorite scene? The part where I plant the tree, he said. Because it's so simple, but it says everything. Bryce doesn't say anything. He just plants the tree. And that's how you know he's changed. John Mahoney as Chet Duncan, the grandfather who saw the truth. John Mahoney, best known for playing Martin Crane in Frasier, brought incredible depth to the role of Chet, Bryce's grandfather. Mahoney's performance was one of the most critically praised aspects of the film. You could just feel his wisdom, Carroll said. Even when he wasn't saying anything, you felt like he knew everything. One of the most touching behind-the-scenes moments happened between Mahoney and McAuliffe. There's a scene where Chet tells Bryce, "That girl is something special," McAuliffe recalled. And I swear, I wasn't acting. When he looked at me and said that, I actually felt it. Like, I actually believed him. Mahoney was known for being incredibly kind and generous on set. He gave me advice about acting and about life, McAuliffe said. He told me, always look for the truth in people. That's the only way you'll ever understand anything. And that stuck with me. The fans who gave Flipped new life. When Flipped was first released in 2010, it didn't make much of a splash at the box office. With a budget of $14 million, it only made about $4.3 million in theaters. But something unexpected happened. Years later, through streaming services and word of mouth, the movie found a second life. Young audiences discovered it, fell in love with its honesty, its warmth, its old-fashioned but timeless love story. On social media, fans started sharing their favorite moments, quoting their favorite lines, and recommending it to their friends. And soon, Flipped was no longer a forgotten film, it was a cult classic. Audience reviews. Why Flipped still matters. One of the reasons Flipped resonates so deeply with audiences is because it is not a typical love story. Fans often point out that it's not about falling in love, it's about learning to see love. One audience member wrote, "This isn't a movie about two people who are destined to be together. It's about how one person realizes they've been blind, and the other realizes they deserve more than a fantasy." Another fan said, "I love how Flipped doesn't force an ending. It lets you decide what happens. Does Julie forgive Bryce? Maybe. Maybe not. But that's what makes it feel real." Many fans also praise the way the movie captures childhood. "This movie reminds me of being 12 years old, sitting on my porch, and wondering what life would be like when I grew up. It's so nostalgic and so perfect." Why Flipped will always be remembered. Even though Flipped wasn't a massive success in theaters, it has something that many big-budget blockbusters don't, a soul. It is a movie about small moments that change everything. A girl in a tree. A boy planting a sapling. A grandfather saying, "That girl is something special." And it is a movie that, for those who truly see it, will always be something special, too. Flipped is more than just a movie. It's a memory, a lesson, and a quiet reminder of the way life changes us in ways we don't always expect. It's a story about perspective, growth, and the realization that love isn't about grand gestures, but about truly seeing someone for who they are. From the moment Julie Baker laid eyes on Bryce Losky, she believed he was special. Not because he had proven himself, but because she saw something in him, something even he didn't see in himself. 4 years, she waited for him to notice her, to understand her, to see the world the way she did. But time has a way of flipping things around. Slowly, Julie realized that maybe Bryce wasn't special after all. That maybe the person she had imagined was never really there. And for the first time, she did what she had never done before. She let go. And just as she stopped chasing, Bryce started to see her. The beauty of Flipped lies in its slow, natural unfolding of emotions. There is no instant change, no dramatic declaration of love. Bryce doesn't suddenly become a hero. Julie doesn't wait for him to catch up. Instead, the film allows them both to grow, separately, in their own time, through their own realizations. And that is what makes it so different from typical love stories. It is not about a perfect romance. It is about change, about waking up one day and realizing that the person you've overlooked for so long might actually be the most incredible person you've ever known. The filmmaking techniques used in Flipped mirror this theme perfectly. The way the camera shifts perspectives, the way light and color tell the story as much as the dialogue does, the way silence is used to highlight emotions too big for words, all of it works together to make this film feel intimate and real. Even though Flipped was not a major box office success, it has slowly grown into something even more meaningful. A film that people discover, cherish, and hold close to their hearts. Over time, it has become a cult classic, gaining a devoted audience that continues to share its message with new generations. People love it not because it is flashy or dramatic, but because it is honest. It reminds us of a time in our lives when we thought we had everything figured out, only to realize we didn't. It reminds us of the people we used to admire, the moments that changed the way we saw the world, and the small, quiet ways that love finds us when we least expect it. And it leaves us with a final, hopeful image. Julie, standing in her front yard, looking at the sapling Bryce planted. Bryce, watching from a distance, waiting. No words. No grand declarations. Just a possibility. Because sometimes, love is not about the moment you fall. It's about the moment you finally see. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Flipped and its themes, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more movie analysis, behind-the-scenes insights, and discussions about the films that leave a lasting impact. And let us know in the comments, do you think Julie forgives Bryce? Do they ever get together? Or is the beauty of the story in the fact that we don't need an answer? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest stories are the ones that don't give us all the answers, but instead leave us thinking long after they're over.